The United States has deployed a Marine Rapid Response Force, 2,000 Marines and sailors, to Israeli waters. They are preparing, according to the Pentagon, for deployment into the country. At least this is according to CNN. Other sources say they likely would not enter the country, but maybe enter neighboring countries. But I'm not quite sure which neighboring country they're going to enter. If perhaps Egypt, I guess. It's probably the only place they could. And this has many people ringing alarm bells. The fact that the U.S. has deployed warships, an aircraft carrier strike group, and now thousands of Marines and sailors into a region at a time when Iran is making threats. I guess technically you can say the U.S. is making threats because Lindsey Graham called for bombing Iran with or without evidence of any wrongdoing, of any involvement in the Hamas attacks. And now, perhaps what may be the most alarming story is that Joe Biden will visit Israel tomorrow. For those that aren't aware, Israel is still under rocket fire from Hamas. It's a particularly dangerous time to visit this country. And in this segment, we are not just dealing with the foreign policy ramifications of Hamas's actions, terror attacks, the capturing of civilians, or the response from Israel. We're dealing with the potential real-world implications of our president entering an active conflict zone, and God forbid, something bad happening to him. It was funny, on Timcast IRL, I asked if Joe Biden, goes to Israel and something bad happens to him, should the U.S. retaliate? Everyone says no. I then asked, what if it was Donald Trump? Everybody says yes. And so it does seem to be that it is largely political, the view that should anything happen to our president, the U.S. should respond. If it's Trump, we should. If it's Biden, we should not. And I get it. People don't like Biden. He's a bad president. Donald Trump, people like Donald Trump, or at least many of the people who follow the show. Now, this isn't like a scientific poll or anything. It was just a bunch of people in the chat room. It's not indicative of the entirety of the people who watch. I'm sure, honestly, based on the actual polls we've done, most people would just say no intervention. But there's an interesting point to be made. And that is, Libby Emmons said, if a U.S. president is killed, no matter how bad they are and whatever, the U.S. must retaliate. Because if you do not defend your president after he's been assassinated, if you do not respond to those who would kill your president, then you have no nation. And I got to say, it's a tough one, but I mostly agree. I don't think it is a good idea for Joe Biden to go to Israel right now. And there are a lot of questions about whether or not he can be secured and kept safe in an active conflict zone such as this. What you need to understand about your terror attacks from groups like Hamas is that they seek to bypass your traditional methods of security. That's what terrorism is. And the U.S. southern border is so porous, we could have these people entering our country. With Marines off the shore of Israel, with an aircraft carrier strike group, warships. I mean, this is a particularly precarious situation. And so I have to wonder. Man. I don't understand why Joe Biden would do this because the risk is great. It's so great. Even CNN is calling it a high stakes trip. And if something happens to him, then what? Well, we've had a lot of conversations about how they get Joe Biden out of the presidential race, considering he's losing to Trump across the board, especially now with RFK Jr. running. The polls are showing that Trump in swing states has a massive lead. Don't take my word for it. Interactive polls. When Kennedy Jr. is included as an independent candidate, Trump leads Joe Biden in 5 of 6 swing states polled. Arizona up 5, Georgia up 3, Michigan up 2, Pennsylvania tie. North Carolina up 3, Florida up 8. To be fair, I don't think it's fair to call Florida a swing state at this point. But considering that Biden wins none of these states, and it's only because of a tie, you can argue Trump didn't win them all. It says a lot about what's going on right now. And so they need someone else to run. Now, we've speculated as to how they pull this off. And I've said, Joe Biden is at a campaign rally in California and then has a medical episode. Gavin Newsom rolls up his sleeves, runs out full speed and saves the president's life, CPR, whatever it may be. And a lot of people, I think it's really funny. They're like, the Secret Service would never allow it. And I'm like, come on. I'm talking about a hypothetical stage scenario in which they're trying to swap out the president, okay? I don't think that there's a plan to do anything like this, but I will say the purpose of the speculation is imagine a scenario in which they could have Biden not run for president, bow out gracefully, and find a way that Kamala Harris doesn't run either, because she polls miserably as well. The challenge is, if Joe Biden faces a medical episode, Kamala Harris is next in line, right? Well, if this is the scary thought. Joe Biden goes to Israel, something bad happens to him. Kamala Harris is next in line. She then becomes the acting president. When she finishes the term out in 2024, she says, I will not seek re-election. My job as vice president was to assume the duties of the president in the event he was incapacitated or harmed, etc. Bows out gracefully and even announces right now. See, here's what's worrying me about this. The risk is great. And the primaries will be in a few months if there's going to be primaries. Now, I don't know what happens because RFK Jr. is, he wanted to run as a Democrat, but now he's running as an independent. And if they do have a primary, what is he going to do? Jump back to the Democratic Party? I don't know. So I think in all likelihood, 99.9%, Joe Biden goes to Israel and it's just escalation and that's it. And then he comes home. And so this is bad across the board. It should not be happening. The argument from, I guess, the Biden administration is we're deploying Marines, military aircraft carriers to prevent escalation. And I'm like, are you serious, dude? This is leading to escalation. Iran is saying no one will stop them. That the resistance is what they're calling it. Let's read the news, and then we'll talk about what may happen. CNN says, President Joe Biden will make an extraordinary wartime visit to Israel this week as he seeks to demonstrate staunch support for the country as it works to eliminate Hamas, while also pressing for ways to ease humanitarian suffering in Gaza. The dueling objectives spelled out by his top diplomat Monday evening bring with them significant risks for the president as he works to prevent the crisis in the Middle East from widening. And they say that, but I'm sorry, I just don't believe them. I think they want it to widen. Aides said Biden had expressed a strong interest in making the journey after being invited over the weekend by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whom Biden has known for 4 decades. He spent Monday deliberating over the trip at the White House with his top national security and intelligence advisor. Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was convening a marathon session with top Israeli officials to discuss opening Gaza to humanitarian aid and preventing civilians from getting caught up in Israel's response to the terror attacks. In announcing Biden's Wednesday trip, after more than 7 hours of negotiations, Blinken said that the United States and Israel have agreed to develop a plan that will enable humanitarian aid from donor nations and multilateral organizations to reach civilians in Gaza. The U.S. president will also travel to Jordan, where he will meet with King Abdullah II, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi of Egypt, and Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. The top U.S. diplomat in recent days met separately with the 3 leaders, all of whom have condemned the situation in Gaza. The security risks of a diplomatic visit to Israel were starkly illustrated Monday when Blinken, in his meeting with Netanyahu, was forced to shelter in place after sirens warned of incoming rockets. White House officials said they'd carefully weighed the risks of a presidential visit and deemed it safe enough both to execute and announce ahead of time. I mean, I just don't see it. I do not see the reason for this. The president doesn't need to do this. The president's visit will build on Blinken's 7-nation multi-day tour of the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera. We understand. What is to be gained by Joe Biden going into a zone where Blinken was just sheltering under rocket fire? Look, man, this one's a tough one. Everybody's screaming at the top of their lungs at each other. People who were once more aligned in the culture war are now just insulting each other. It's war, dude. And everyone's blood is boiling. My concern right now is this. The president goes to Israel. There is a rocket fire attack. The president, he is a weak man, doesn't make it. And then we get abject chaos. What happens next? Well, with thousands of U.S. Marines sailing to Israel, while the Pentagon orders 2,000 additional troops ready for potential deployment, I think we're gearing up for war. And if we're going to have war, we're going to need a casus belli, a cause for war. And what would be that casus belli? I don't know, a president dying? If the United States president, Joe Biden, is injured, maimed, killed, or incapacitated by Hamas, there will be a direct and immediate response by the United States. And here's the challenge. And the reason why I bring this up, do I believe the president will be harmed? No, honestly, I don't. I have a normalcy and optimism bias in this regard. Come on. Something like that happening, that is rare. It doesn't happen. Biden's going to go there. He's going to say some garbled nonsense words. He's going to come home. That's the most likely scenario. I just can't say anything else. But my concern is that this could be a dramatic international incident, which could result in World War III. And that's why it's just an unnecessary risk. If it is 1 in 200 million chance that Joe Biden be harmed, maimed, killed, etc., why buy that lottery ticket? For real. Cost benefit analysis, cost risk analysis. Joe Biden goes there. What is to be gained? Very little. I mean, the diplomatic meetings that could be held to temper the situations, to calm them down, could be held by Blinken or anybody else. Biden doesn't need to go there, but he is. And that means maybe it's a lottery ticket that if we win, we get World War III. Hey, that's a lottery ticket I don't think we should buy, even though it's probably not going to win. What's the point? The risks outweigh any potential benefit. Can't call him on the phone? Video conference? Can't meet in a neighboring nation? How about this? All of the world leaders hold a summit, perhaps in Egypt. Not the safest, but safer substantially. A neighboring nation. They can go to Cairo. They can have a nice meeting right at the airport. They can all discuss these things, shake hands, security everywhere, and then he leaves. No, he's going to go directly into Israel where rockets are being lobbed at civilians. That's my concern. And this is what we have to consider. The presidential order of succession. First up, obviously, is the vice president and the Speaker of the House. As many of you know, there isn't one. There's going to be a vote today, and many are hoping it will be Jim Jordan, but it may not be. So, with no Speaker of the House, obviously it doesn't matter because Kamala Harris is readily available to assume the role of the presidency should anything happen to Joe Biden, God forbid. But next up beyond Kamala Harris, with no Speaker of the House, would be the President pro tempore. Is it tempe or tempore, whatever, of the Senate? I've heard it said by a bunch of different ways, so I'm like, whatever. Pro temp of the Senate. And that is, the current one is, it's that one we talked about it last night. It's, look at all these guys. This is the second most powerful position in the Senate. And it is Patty Murray, a Democrat from Washington. Oh, heavens me. Not going to be too fun if that's the case. But that's who it would be without a Speaker of the House. After that, it's Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Defense, Attorney General. Ooh, number 7. Let's avoid that one. I don't think we have to worry about it, though. Completely honest. I really don't see this as being a very likely outcome. I do see the very serious potential for massive escalation of war. Aside from the 2,000 troops, we have this story from the Daily Mail. Iran's Ayatollah Khamenei warns no one will be able to stop Muslims or resistance forces if Israel keeps bombing Gaza days after hundreds of thousands rallied to ex-Hamas chiefs' call for a day of jihad. If the crimes of the Zionist regime continue, Muslims and resistance forces will become impatient and no one can stop them, Khamenei said. No matter what the Zionist regime does, it cannot make up for the scandalous failure it suffered. You know, what an interesting time to be alive is the only thing I can say. I find the whole Israel-Palestine thing so interesting. These people are chanting free, free Palestine from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. You know what that means. From the river, I believe that's the Jordan River, right? Oh, we have the map. We can pull it up just to make sure. I am not a foremost expert on Israel or things like this, but you have the river here, and this is the Jordan River, I believe. Yeah, Jordan River. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Hey, that's the entirety of Israel. And yeah, there's no two-state solution here. And so with the U.S. deploying warships into the Mediterranean just off the coast of Israel, I mean, we've got the makings of serious war. Now, I don't see Jordan likely being as involved. I mean, they're condemning it. Lebanon's already involved. Syria's already involved. And you got to wonder about U.S. deployments into, say, Iraq and Afghanistan, although Afghanistan's quite a bit away. Iran is here, and they are separated by Iraq, which all makes a whole lot of sense as to why the U.S. invaded. So who is going to be on which sides if this does escalate? Lebanon, Syria, more likely to be aligned with Russia. Syria, of course, is an ally of Russia. And this is an escalation we don't need. But to be completely honest, I don't see right now this escalating to World War III. I believe if it does escalate, it will be a regional conflict. That's bad. It is. It is the combination of a multi-front set of conflicts for the United States, which could result in the makings of World War III. China moving on Taiwan is not the biggest move in the world. It's not World War III. But you combine all of these and you have the makings of something truly devastating. The issue with Syria being bombed is that in Tartus, which is, where's Tartus at? There it is. You have a Russian naval base. And so that is Russian interests. It is not that far off from Lebanon. And Israel has been engaging in airstrikes on, I believe, Aleppo and Damascus. I could be wrong about Aleppo. And Tartus is right there in the middle. So you've got Russian interests in Syria and a very real threat. I don't know if Iran actually engages or what happens, but you have the makings of something dangerous. Now, here's my fear. This conflict, this region, look, okay, Israel and Gaza, it's relatively small. Egypt, more aligned with the United States. Saudi Arabia, that's interesting, but cutting deals with the United States. Jordan seems not be as big of a player in this one. Iraq, of course, the U.S. basically conquered. Syria aligned with Russia and engaging in conflict with Israel as Lebanon, as well as Lebanon. And the argument is Iran active or not? Are they transporting weapons? They may be. There's a concern that Afghanistan, that the Taliban is shipping weapons, formerly U.S. weapons, through Iran and then through secret tunnels and making their way to Israel. Now, the big question is not whether or not Hamas-Gaza results in, Israel-Hamas results in a big conflict. The issue is, if something happens to Joe Biden and warmongers like Nikki Haley and Lindsey Graham say it was Iran, and then we get this big news cycle about Iran supporting terror, which killed a president, they'll get their war with Iran that they've been trying to get for several decades. There was that famous news story, I think it was Wesley Clark, said that there were 7 nations the U.S. wanted to invade. And I believe, I could be wrong about this because I don't pay too much attention to it, but Iran is the last one. John Bolton said during the Trump administration, this time next year, we will be celebrating in Tehran. What a horrifying thing to say. Because there's no reason to invade Iran. There's none. And it's also important to understand, Iran is not some desert nation that we can just swoop into. It is a massively developed nation with a large population. It is particularly mountainous and will be very difficult for the U.S. to engage in conflict in. Not to mention, you are going to have widespread conflict all across the region. The interesting thing is, hey, look at this. This is something that people need to understand. When the U.S. invaded Iraq and invaded Afghanistan, we surrounded Iran on both sides with U.S. military bases. You think Iran doesn't know this? Of course they do. That's it. That is their national security. That is their security interests. Iran, the U.S. wants Iran to fall in line with the Western machine. And they've not. They've not. And so the United States, the powerful interests in the deep state, the bureaucratic state, or whatever, the intelligence agencies, this is where they want war. That's the concern. We're gearing up, baby. It seems politically the easiest path would be if Joe Biden can't win, if Kamala Harris can't win, and you need both of these individuals to leave, and before a primary would happen, which is probably around March, then you need a legitimate reason for them to not be available. I do not see a reason for a high-stakes trip by the president. And my concern is it's just opening the door for an easy exit for Democrats. I know I'm not saying I think that it is likely or probable that they're intentionally sending Joe Biden to risk himself. I'm saying it would be convenient for Democrats to get rid of an unpopular president in a way that would actually substantially boost his popularity and, if anything happens to him, result in an easy exit and entrance for someone like Gavin Newsom. And then things will get interesting. Because I think even many conservatives, they'll criticize Joe Biden, they'll say he's awful, and then they'll say they attacked a U.S. president and we must retaliate. Libby said it. You'll get the more moderate conservative types and centrists who typically are like, I see no reason for intervention, being like, yeah, killing a U.S. president is cause for intervention, is cause for retaliation. That's a tough one. Comment. Let me know what you think. No, seriously. Should the United States intervene? Well, I shouldn't even say intervene. I should say retaliate. A retaliatory strike on any nation that kills a U.S. president. I mean, it's an interesting question because if you don't, what are you saying to the world? That you have no military power, you have no nation? We cannot allow someone to strike at our president. And that's a challenge because when Donald Trump crossed the DMZ into North Korea, there was great personal risk. I would not expect the United States to blow up North Korea if something bad happened to him on a peace mission. But perhaps you'd have to, because that's the point. You're engaging in this mission of peace with great risk to your personal self, but you also know you've got the might of the U.S. military standing behind you, and so nothing bad is going to happen. And that's how we bring about peace. But I don't know for sure. All I can say is the scary reality is if something happens to Joe Biden, you got World War III. Donald Trump could even enter the presidency a year from now, and Trump would say, as crooked as Biden was, we will not stand for anyone attacking a president. And you're going to have people waving American flags and cheering for it, which will be a very, very interesting circumstance. We're deploying troops. We're getting ready for war. They're preparing a deployment into Israel, and Joe Biden is heading there. So not only are we preparing for war, but we have a real risk of something happening to our president, which could be the casus belli for war to begin. And then conveniently, our troops are ready to invade. If something bad happens to Joe Biden, U.S. Marines offshore storm Gaza. Then what? That's the scary thought. All the pieces have lined up for something truly bad to happen. Ultimately, I think nothing will happen, okay? Because I have a normalcy bias and it's just unlikely. Let's hope. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.